You are the beginning and the end of all things, and the source of everything that we have and everything that we are.
We thank you for having allowed us to be members of the teaching profession and for entrusting to us the education of our young people.
We recognize the greatness of our vocation as well as the serious responsibility placed on our shoulders. And while mindful of our own limitations, we promise you, O God, always to strive to improve our skills with which you have endowed us.
Strengthen us when our ideals seem to be falling or when we tend to look at things in a negative way. Help us, O God, to be true examples, in deed as well as in word, to our students, and to have a special care for those whose family life is defective or non-existent.
Bless our association and give to all our officers and members joy in the work of education.
Help us finally, O God, to be true friends to our fellow teachers, and grant us when you call us out of this world, we may come to you to receive the eternal reward which in your infinite mercy you have prepared for us. Amen.
Good day, comrades. Today, on this auspicious occasion, we celebrate the 44th anniversary of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association. A wise woman, me, once said, to appreciate the benefits that we enjoy in the present, we sometimes need to reflect on the past. Look at the struggles we endured and how far we have come. To aid us in this endeavor, today we will look at the history through the eyes of some stalwarts of the association. Mr. Trevor Oliver, Mr. Peter Wilson, Mr. Alan Noriega, and Miss Curla Robertson Thomas, of whom was with us from the very beginning, rallied with us throughout, and are still here with us.
Mr. Martin Lumpkin, President of TTUTA. Mr. Dorica, First Vice President of TTUTA. The Executive of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, our hard-working teachers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm pleased to bring greetings today as we celebrate the 44th anniversary of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association. Congratulations. You don't look a day over 40. This milestone marks a significant achievement for the organization, which has been working tirelessly to promote the welfare and advancement of our nation's educators. As I should know, because I am still a TTUTA member. I may be owing for 1 year though. TTUTA has been a steadfast advocate for the rights of teachers and the education sector as a whole. Your unwavering commitment to the cause has been a driving force behind the development of the profession. Through your tireless efforts, you have built strong partnerships with the Ministry of Education to help shape the future of education in Trinidad and Tobago. And for that, Dr. Dolly and myself sincerely thank you. Speaking of which, as the ministry moves into the future, through its efforts of digitally transforming the education sector, TTUTA is invited to move along with us. Our digital transformation efforts, branded MOE Access, impacts every aspect from how we work to how we learn and how we innovate, as well as how we collaborate and communicate. The ministry is very much excited to see how our new and improved teacher training website translates as a professional development hub for our various teachers and stakeholders. Today, as we all celebrate your 44th anniversary, we also celebrate the countless teachers who have dedicated their lives to the education of our nation's children. We recognize the sacrifices they make every day to ensure that our students have the best possible chance at success. To the members of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, the executive and staff of the Ministry of Education, offer our heartfelt congratulations on this special occasion. Your dedication to the profession of teaching and to the education sector on a whole is an inspiration to us all. I have no doubt that your hard work and commitment will continue to help shape the future of education in Trinidad and Tobago for many years to come. I sincerely thank you.
Let us now listen to one of the founding members of the Committee for the Unification of Teachers, Comfort, and a past president of TTUTA, Mr. Trevor Oliver.
Teachers many years ago were suffering real bad. The whole question of payment, teachers very lowly paid. The schools were run down. Run down in the sense that they were leaking, some of them were leaking. You had some of them, the real teaching could not have gone on because they had to close very regularly and so on. They had to close very regularly and so on. And there was a group of people who were saying all the time, this had to change. Teachers have to remove themselves from this and be in a situation that is better. One of the person who was looking at that situation is Mr. Frank C. Prasad. And so Mr. Frank C. Prasad, who was a teacher at Mount Hope Secondary, yes, that is it, Mount Hope Secondary, he decided, the stupidness must finish, if I heard him well, and therefore he called on us, and 22 of us were selected to change the roadmap of teachers, to give them comfort, Committee for the Unification of Teachers. He got us together. I was one of the persons. There were a number of other persons. I am only surviving one of comfort, if I should say that. And we set ourselves with a table of things to be done, all right? And this was like, like what I mentioned, but he pinpointed it. He said, look, we're going to have this organized on a table. We're going to organize it where people could understand it, and then we will go, and the idea was to go to the population outside, the school population, where they were, and so on. People like Jack Warner was in it. Harold Taylor, who was the first president, was one of those persons. And we went from school to school, we went to places where we met parents and so on, and we started to push the method forward. All right? As I said, what we looked at when we tabled, better conditions, working conditions better, we want to make that. Security for teachers and children. At that time, there was no security for primary school teachers at all. That was a fight that came out of what we had put on the agenda. And then I was one of the persons who led the fight for the security for children. There were no security for primary school children and so on. And there were attacks very regularly. regularly when children were walking and so on. So this, we said, must stop, and we fought that. Children for getting teachers. As I said before, there were teachers who were not getting the organization that they wanted in terms of that. Children, we campaigned for also that we must have these schools properly fitted, and then not only salaries but issues like teachers haven't been paid for a long time, teachers just being dismissed without, telling them what it is, using a number of hackneyed and old methods to fire teachers and so on, and a heavy shortage generally of teachers, mostly in the primary sector, but this was throughout and so on. Some schools were attached to areas where there was a lot of violence and things like that. So we fought for that, all right? So that in 1979, as I said, Frank C. Prasad was the man. Mount Hope Junior Secondary is where we gathered, and those were the things we tried to formalize and to fight for. The reason why I'm not going into in depth in other things is that because these things will have to be done on their own, because it's a lot I mentioned there before. These things will have to come out in detail. What I'm really doing is giving a kind of look at what it was like when comfort came, and what comfort did, and what comfort was, looking to change, and that was to bring about what I will call the catalyst for that change. Right now, if we review, I don't want to go too far, we will see a lot of things have been changed. Today, teachers have some of the best salaries, right? Although we need more and all of that, and they need and deserve more. I want to make that clear, right? But teachers have salaries that they didn't have before and so on. And therefore, that made life a whole lot of different from what they were, right? Today, they can go on the job market, what you call the market, and look at what comparative teachers, then teachers comparative people, other persons who work similar to teachers, to compare their salary with them and to really get that to fit into a pay package. So the pay package wasn't just looking and saying, all right, well, you'll get 10% and so on. It had gone way, way out and so on. And I must say that I had the privilege, just to say this, I had the privilege to lead one of the best salary negotiations with a number of other officers that worked with me and so on. And we were able to get some of the best salaries for teachers comparable with other salaries, comparable with other similar jobs. So therefore, we have a lot of work to do the comparison, but we are thankful that we at least cover some grounds thanks to the unification of teachers and Mr. C. Prasad work with his team.
We now have Mr. Peter Wilson, past General Secretary of TTUTA.
we had the struggles to form TTUTA, so that, as we would have heard, that we had a meeting which was called by Frank C. Passad at that famous meeting at Mount Hope Junior Secondary, which led to the formation of that Comfort Committee of 22, which sought to unify teachers. Teachers were represented by 3 different unions at the time, a minimum of 3. And of course, a lot of struggle went through a whole movement, in a sense, by teachers in terms of demonstrations in the streets, petitions, signature campaigns, mass meetings all over the country, and so on, which culminated in the formation of TTUTA, Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association. So TTUTA came about, and of course set about its business in terms of a constitution, for example. That constitution was established in 1979, and then it registered as a trade union. So TTUTA was registered as a trade union in 1980. I think it was April 1980. And from there, of course, during that time as well, a lot of protests and demonstrations were going on to have the law change, the legislation change. The law at that time recognized and entrenched the different unions, the 3 different unions, as representatives of teachers. So that there was a whole struggle to have that law change so that we could have a similar system as to that of other trade unions at the time, or other workers in other sectors, where you would have a recognized majority union. That was a serious battle. That was what led to the numerous marches and protests and those famous marches around the Red House in Port of Spain, with thousands and thousands of teachers marching and so on. The estimate at that time was that we had as many as 7,000 or 8,000 teachers in those marches going around the Red House. But so those sorts of things were taking place, the establishment of administrative office, the development of the portfolios of the elected national officers, elections, because according to TTUTA's constitution, elections would be held every 3 years. And in contrast to the unions which went before, that this would be on a 1 person, 1 vote system. The first election was in 1980, and of course elections have been held every 3 years since that time, and TTUTA has a proud record of that sort of democracy, having its elections every 3 years for elected national officers. At first, those elected national officers were not full-time. They were continued as teachers, and of course were serving the union part-time. But it was soon recognized that that was not viable, and therefore it was around 1982 that the Conference of Delegates, there was a motion, a resolution, and so on, and the Conference of Delegates moved and in fact approved that TTUTA should have 6 national officers as full-time officers, paid by the union, released by the ministry and so on, and paid by the association and working full-time with the association. So things like the introduction of the group health plan. TTUTA at that time developed a group health plan. That came in 1982. The skunks. We have this skunk booklet which we take for granted now, that started in 1982, and things like that. So the foundation being laid. TTUTA in fact had its first appointed officer to deal with IR on a part. It was a short contract and so on, but still somewhere around 1982 as well. It began to do things like take its place on both the regional level and the global level. So that at the regional level, we have the Federation of Teacher Unions throughout the Caribbean Union of Teachers, and TTUTA took its place there. So that, as well as the global stage, so the Confederation of Teacher Unions globally at that time was there was a long name, the WCOTP, the World Confederation of Organizations of the Teaching Profession, it was. And TTUTA was accepted there and began to play its part in those international bodies. And of course, to gain support from those international bodies and to look at examples of best practice in terms of trade unions and so on. One of the special things about TTUTA and its constitution is the way it caters for its members in Tobago. But there was an officer, a full-time officer, which was developed to call a Tobago officer, who would in fact have a special charge of representing the interests of teachers in Tobago, and of course representing the positions of officers in Tobago as well. That first Tobago officer was elected in 1984. That was Mr. René Dumas, now deceased. Things like training for teachers, scholarships at Cipriani Labour College. Those were gained and so on from the CPO and the ministry in 1986. And people started doing labor studies and later on cooperative studies and so on. And well, much later on, occupational safety and health and so on. So that those foundational things, as I call them, were taking place. South Office, building purchase for that in 1987 and so on. So that those were you could see the association laying its ground, its foundation. And by the time that we came to the end of the 80s, as I said, TTUTA was moving ahead. Already it had, in terms of professional development, it had developed an alliance with it was TACET at the time, if I can remember. TACET, I think, was an association, I think it was a Trinidad Association for the special education, or for special education teachers. Association of Special Education Teachers in Trinidad, which had developed at that time. And it worked with TTUTA and with then the University of Sheffield to introduce for the first time a certificate diploma program in special education. And TTUTA, in fact, undertook that program, as I said, in alliance with those bodies. And we had the first teachers going into that program in 1989. And in fact, the first batch of teachers from that, the first cohort, graduated in 1993. So as I say, that foundational work going on and starting to blossom and so on. So that 1990 saw the establishment of TTUTA's Code of Ethics for teachers. Tenets that teachers should abide by because they were self-evident in a sense almost. If you're looking at being a professional and promoting education and being able to perform that role and so on in the society. And that Code of Ethics, after lots of consultation and took a few years and so on, but in 1990 it was actually established and launched. By 1998 as well, TTUTA had, again in collaboration with the University of Sheffield, introduced a Masters in Education program, which, again showing its commitment to professional development and so on. There were also things like, as I talked about before, about TTUTA taking its place regionally and on the global stage. TTUTA also was taking its place in the local trade union movement. In 1991, there was the launch of NATOC, the National Trade Union Center, which was a sort of federation of all the trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago. That was significant because before that there were splits, again ideological splits, in two different trade union centers, the CPTU and the Trade Union Congress. And they came together, and TTUTA was a part of that in working as well in bringing this new organization, NATOC, together. And that was when TTUTA was able to forge a relationship with the Swedish Teachers Federation. I think it was Lara Forbunde. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's it. And to develop the study circle program, which was a mass. But maybe one of the most important things I come to the end of the 90s was in the industrial relations sphere, really, in terms of there were two maybe significant developments. One was in 1997 when TTUTA was able to negotiate its first, strictly speaking, not a collective agreement, but its first comprehensive agreement with the CPO in terms of teachers. So recognizing the trade union rights of teachers, cementing, well, it was already in the law, but cementing in an agreement different types of leave for teachers and so on. An agreement that still holds today in terms of the rights of teachers in TTUTA as a trade union, and in terms of some of the entitlements that teachers enjoy, time off and so on and so on. And in fact, the government agreed at the time to initiate a job evaluation process and employed a consultant, Pete Marwick, to lead that process. TTUTA supported that, and in fact, with some, of course, there was a need for a lot of work among teachers so that people could understand what was going on and so on. But TTUTA supported that process, and that Pete Marwick, in fact, submitted a report to the government by 1999. And TTUTA was able to sit with the government, and on the basis of that job evaluation process, which evaluated the jobs of teachers, scored them using accepted instruments for scoring jobs and so on based on different factors in the job, including qualifications and the job responsibilities and so on. And of course, what it was found was that the teaching service jobs at the time were really poorly aligned in terms of their responsibilities with salary and so on. So that out of that job evaluation, TTUTA was able with the CPO to negotiate a new teaching service structure, where based on the way that the jobs were scored and the worth of the job, they were placed in a different structure, a different hierarchy, and which is what we know today. And then new positions were created. So for example, positions which were informal in the schools before now became formal positions, like deans in the secondary schools, like heads of departments in secondary schools and primary schools, position of senior teacher in the primary school. These were new positions which were developed and so on, special education teachers and so on. And those job descriptions, of course, will define the duties of teachers, define their responsibilities, define what they're working, what they should be doing, who they report to, what their responsibilities are, and so on. And that was a first then. On the basis of that as well, it meant that was accompanied by, for the first time, the use of so you have the jobs in a new structure, you have the worth of the jobs and so on. And because you're using an instrument which is used to compare jobs, not only, but anywhere, in any industry and so on, that it meant that you could then compare salaries. And therefore, the idea of that external labor market survey came up there. So that salaries were set by comparing teaching jobs. In other words, if you have a job of similar worth as teaching outside of teaching, what was the salary in teaching? What was the salary in the job, the same job, the similar job outside of teaching? And by doing that was this idea of this external labor market survey. And it meant that jobs which have the same worth in teaching or outside should get similar salaries. And that was the argument used by TTUTA and has been used since then in terms of setting teachers' salaries, that external labor market survey, comparing teachers' jobs with similar jobs outside, based on the job descriptions outside of teaching. So that enabled a big leap, a quantum leap in teachers' salaries. And in 2000, they were able to conclude that agreement, and I was an officer by that time. And that was a significant negotiation. So teachers' salaries jumped up, quantum leaps and so on. And really it was a sort of, again, a fulfillment of that original dream, in a sense, of trying to get teachers their worth in terms of the role that they play in the development of society.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Let us now listen to Mr. Alan Noriega, a past second vice president of the association.
After the Pete Marwick consultancy and the change in approach for negotiation for teachers, we remained with the external labor market arrangements, where teachers' salaries were paid in close approximation to what persons with similar qualifications, knowledge, and experience would have received in the external labor market. In some negotiations, people in grade 3 and 4 would have gotten closest to the market rate, which is 100%. Some people in the lower grades did not quite get 100% because the reasoning was that these are entry positions and they did not want it to appear as these were career positions that people would want to stay, but they would contemplate improving in their qualifications so that they move up into grades 4 and grade 5. On close scrutiny of the structure, members may notice that in grades 4 and grade 3, the increments as it relates to longevity move from 3 to 5, and this was predicated on the fact that grades 3 and 4 are where you have the bulk of teachers, and because of the limited number of promotional opportunities, in addition to some people who did not have any notion of wanting to move because they loved the classroom, they claim, that since they were going to spend considerable years in grade 3 and grade 4 without moving up to higher grades, that is part of the logic or reasoning in extended incremental longevities from 3 points to 5 points. In addition to that, once we introduced the external labor market, we came to the point where we had to have, how do we properly assess teachers in the performance of their duties? And that is when we moved to the Performance Management Appraisal Process, or PMAP. Something that was very noble, very honorable, if I might say so that now teachers would have some say in a meaningful way in terms of their performance of duties. We had gotten to the point where we felt that it was going to be rolled out by 2007. However, we had one glitch, that was the implementation schedule, and that was an issue back in 2007, and we are now in 2023, and PMAP has not yet been rolled out, and we hope that something can be done about that sooner than later. We also have the issue of the change, as I said, in the due structure, and it was in between 2004 and 2007 that payment of dues was adjusted from a percentage of the dues that was paid to a percentage of the salary of a teacher 1. And it was a 1.25% of the teacher 1 base salary that was used. So whenever there was a negotiation, the association did not have to go to the conference of delegates to haggle over an increase. It was an automatic arrangement with the employer that the dues will increase to facilitate the 1.25% of the base salary of the teacher 1. And that has been going very smoothly, and I hope it continues. And the only discussion might be whether they would want to increase from 1.25 to whatever percentage that might be deemed necessary to meet the operational cost of the association, given the position of the employer in terms of salary increases. Because we have to maintain the situation where the association could meet the demands of its members, because as the RMU for teachers, I am sure they would like to know that the association is representing their best interests. In terms of the location at Carlson Field, it was during the 2004-2007 period that the association actually got documentary proof of the lease and the title to the area now where we have our head office and our center of operations. Another important development during that period was the delinking and unification of the teaching service. So while teachers were delinked from the public service and they moved from having ranges to grades, because you would have had ranges and you have people being paid as range 63E and F and G. You now had the job evaluation, which positioned people in up to 9 grades. And persons who were involved in education were now unified in the teaching service once they were involved in education. And you have people like guidance officers, school supervisors, and other persons in education, curriculum officers. And you have people who may be affiliated with other organizations fall into some areas called Schedule 3, and now they have been members of TTUTA before, but now TTUTA has been recognized as the RMU for persons in the education sector. The question is, these people who are in other schedules are bargaining units, and it is up to the association to be recognized as the bargaining unit for these people who occupy those areas. In addition to that, people ought to know that for some time during the 2004-2007 period, TTUTA was making strides in terms of seeking agency shop order. While that was making some progress, because of the political situation at the time, it never reached anywhere. And now I understand that it is something that members are going to have to take a decision on in the not too distant future, and that is a laudable step in the right direction. Yeah, another important issue that during that era was the de-shifting and conversion of the junior secondary schools. TTUTA played a very pivotal role in ensuring that this was a smooth arrangement, because there were teams organized and committees, and for each school we had advised and we had a member of TTUTA sitting on the committee as they work towards the deliberations and the transition from junior secondary and the shift system to a whole day school. Of course, that was not without some problems and some issues, because you would have had some construction taking place. In fact, some buildings are not yet completed, and thanks to TTUTA, people's safety and health would have generally been protected, and we look forward to the completion of that exercise, and hopefully membership will continue to receive the support of TTUTA in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Noriega. Ms. Curla Robertson-Thomas was one of our very first female second vice president. Let us hear what she has to say.
We, as an association, have continued to advocate for ECC teachers, because TTUTA believes that a teacher is a teacher is a teacher no matter where they are in the strata. That bore some fruit in that there was a call by the central executive to ensure that officers go out and visit those ECC centers and start to make relationships so that they can be attached to districts and get feedback. It was also where we were able to stop the issue of ECC teachers being made to go out through their vacation when there literally was not much for them to be doing there. It also saw that persons acknowledged the right to have, under the Maternities Protection Act, the ability to have prenatal visits as any other worker in Trinidad and Tobago. And some ECC teachers actually got involved actively in the association. For sure, we know in St. George East, there was a member that became a member of the executive until she sought living outside of the jurisdiction. So that is something that we continue to monitor and highly favor. The minister, both minister under Minister Garcia and currently under Minister Gatsby Dolly, we were told that the legislation is finally going to be changed to have ECC teachers brought under the Education Act so that they would automatically be covered by the RMU, which is TTUTA. In 2014, the association settled its last current salary negotiations for the period 2011 to 2014, and that was done in a swifter time than most. If my recollection is right, I think it is maybe the second one that was settled within the period, while others have been settled outside. And currently we know we are currently at the Industrial Court awaiting feedback on our last two collective agreements that are outstanding. We also saw in 2016, TTUTA had its first female second vice president in the person of Curla Robertson-Thomas. who managed to serve 2 terms, and that is a position that typically has been held by men and is one that people value, that mainly our men are able to do a good job in that position, but the membership thought differently and allowed for a difference. That worked out. That was followed by 2019, the first female president, Ms. Antonia Tika de Freitas, came into the association. While she served 1 term, we must remember that she was also by a by-election elected as the 3rd Vice President of the Caribbean Union of Teachers and is still currently serving by way of an election as the 1st Vice President of the Caribbean Union of Teachers. The issue of agency shop, which the union for many, many years had written to the recognition board to get them to do the survey and poll that is necessary to have that fulfilled, and was repeatedly told no. Finally, TTUTA through its efforts got the recognition board to find that money to do the poll, and we're at the stage where we're ready to conduct that poll, and that is something that the association and its members must ensure that they participate in, because it's to the benefit of not only the association but the teaching service, because non-members usually receive a lot of benefits that members pay for. And the one thing I would tell you as a trade unionist and as a member of society, one must never lose the right to have representation and proper representation by an RMU. So this is something that should really, really be at the front of every teacher in Trinidad and Tobago and every member of Tutors Association to participate in, to ensure that it's successful. There is also the fact that in 2019, the association also finally got recognition for the 3rd schedule members. While the association had been doing representation of many members in the area of 3rd schedule, they were not officially part of the RMU, and that was really an important time for us as we got them into our RMU, and now they are officially a branch. So they're able to conduct their own business and make their own decisions as would normal districts in TTUTA do. So that is really, really important that they now have proper representation for them. And that includes persons like supervisors, even the CEO of education is part of that 3rd schedule, technical officers, guidance, support, anybody that's education related, they are our members. Of course, it's valuable to the association in that it accounts for more areas for us to be able to get from those persons things that are affecting education from all spheres. So that is important to note. And yes, some would say it also adds to the revenue of the association to be able to do its business. What is also notable, because I have spoken about the first female officers that the association saw, and I must add, I believe that the current 3rd VP is also the first female 3rd VP that the association has had. For the teaching service to be mainly run or populated rather by females, but historically we have generally had mainly men serving as officers. That is a good picture and a good sign that things are changing, and that members, the female members, are stepping forward to take more leadership roles. What is notable, we had a committee that was called the Committee on the Status of Women for many years, and finally the conference changed the name to the Committee on Gender Issues. More and more issues, it gives the committee a wider scope, and that committee is one of the most functioning committees in TTUTA that deals with a number of relevant issues affecting not only the females but the males in our service. Teachers are under a lot of stress. Is one of the most stressful careers that you could enter into, but it's a vocation. You have to love it. People who are in the service love it. Doesn't mean that they do not have to face a lot of challenges, and that committee usually offers a number of areas that teachers can, one, have relaxation, two, have education, and have ways in which they can reduce the stresses that they receive on the job. Training in the association is something that we must never forget. It is why some of us were able to serve as members of the association and to be better at doing our jobs at our various schools or units in the Ministry of Education, and training continued to be a priority in the association. partnership with external people like the Canadian Federation of Teachers and so on, where we did things like special education. So the association was able to mount several training sessions that have now allowed teachers to understand their roles as teachers, to understand the role of admin, to become better administrators. And we don't stop there, because the association, under its study circle coordinator, who sometimes is really put in the back seat, does a number of study circles throughout districts. And that's when teachers have that aha moment, when they really recognize what they've signed up for, where they get to delve into all the laws and the regulations and all the things that affect the teaching service and the things that are mandatory for them to treat with. The IR department was also able to convince the General Council of the need to add another layer. While those things are still being worked out logistically, they are supposed to be now IR assistants, so that members would not have to say that they're waiting for a long period to have matters addressed. And that is because the association continues to listen to the cries of its members. In 2017, a document was created out of the IR department to allow for members to list their occupational health and safety needs, especially those teachers who had to remove themselves for health and safety. Because what was happening before is it was not being properly documented by many schools, and then problems were created in classifying teachers' leave when that time came. So that document was created and is still in circulation now, so that teachers can use that to properly document their removal. USH committees, district USH committees were also launched, so that the districts will have an opportunity first to help deal with situations that occur within the district that fall under occupational health and safety, of which there are quite many. And TTUTA continue to advocate for all our situations when it met with the Ministry of Education. So there are a number of things. In TTUTA, there are small wins and there are big wins. While the membership usually wants to hear about the big wins, we have to acknowledge that every building block adds to the success of the association. And we must never lose sight of that, because if we don't have an association, we will allow the employer to trample on not only us, but those that will come. Teachers are certainly in a better position than they were many years ago because of the association, and I'm sure that other speakers would have told you where we came from with having the ELM and having teachers brought out of the public service and into the teaching service, and we continue to advocate for those things.
Thanks, Ms. Robertson Thomas. I will now introduce you to the President of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, Mr. Martin Lumpkin.
The founders of TTUTA recognized the need for one union for all teachers and set the wheels in motion in 1979, March 31st to be specific, as approximately 150 teachers met at Mount Hope Junior Secondary School. The major player in this was Mr. Frank B. Sipasad, in whom the association is eternally grateful. We must pay recognition to the Committee on the Unification of Teachers, COMFORT, the 22 who were charged with fulfilling the dream of unification. On April 24, 1980, TTUTA was registered as a trade union. The Education Act was later amended the following year, and in December 1981, TTUTA was recognized as the majority recognized union for teachers in Schedule 1. TTUTA, over the years, as espoused by several past national officers, gained many benefits for its members, from improved salaries, collective agreements, delinking of the teaching service, job descriptions, and improved working conditions. TTUTA today continues the battle, the struggle to ensure that the rights and freedom of our members are jealously guarded. I remind our members that enshrined within the Constitution of TTUTA, under Rule 3, which clearly states our aims and objects, and I quote, "To promote the cause of education and to promote and protect the professional, economic, spiritual, and social well-being of its members," end quote. The executive of TTUTA, along with all our functionaries and like-minded members, will continue the struggle and fight for justice and equity. Happy 44th anniversary. Long live TTUTA.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we come to the end of this celebration, we at TTUTA would like to thank you, our members, for rallying with us throughout. Thanks to our stalwarts for making this presentation a reality.